Welcome back to another TGS podcast with me, Johnny Carter, and Tim Weston of the National Gamekeepers Organisation. How you doing, man?
I'm good, Johnny. You?
Yeah, very good, very good. A little while since we last spoke. Mostly we waited because we wanted to see what this incoming government would do. And so we're here today to kind of discuss and figure out what's going on, what is the outlook like. Hopefully, you've got a lot of answers to a lot of questions.
Well, hopefully, Johnny, but I think there's still a lot that we don't know. So, but there's a lot we do know, and there's a lot we can guess at. We're really good on speculation, conjecture, and incorrect information on this podcast, so let's carry on with that.
Again, I think, like with most things, political forecasting is best guesswork. That's kind of the thing with political forecasting. You're given some information that they said. You have to guess then what's going to happen when that turns into a bill. You have to guess what's going to happen to that bill and any amendments when it goes to Parliament, and etc. as it goes up through the House before it actually becomes a law. Being prepared for the worst and maybe guessing at the reality is as best we can do and offer people perhaps some positivity and some reality.
Well, what we know is that Labour have got a huge majority in Parliament.
It's a lot of seats.
Yeah, it's a lot of seats. So essentially, if they want to do something, they can, right? Because if they whip their MPs into voting for a bill, into a policy, they will get it through because they've got more seats than anyone else by a massive majority.
Yeah, 404 of the total seats, which is 650 seats, and they own 404 of them. Conservatives have 121, Liberal Democrats have 72, SNP have 9.
And we've got to remember that some of those parties don't take their seats, so the 650 seats aren't always used, and other parties will align with the policy of the incumbent government, etc., etc. So
yeah, the smaller seats, obviously, they're just looking to make friends and exercise the power on the very few things that they can actually influence, I presume.
Yeah. The Labour Party have got a very... I mean, they've had a fantastic election for them. They've got the mandate from the British people to run the government, therefore run the country, and they've got that mandate in a really big way. So
yeah, a working majority of 167 seats. They could do whatever they wanted politically without resistance, more or less.
Absolutely, and I think that's why they've been so bullish in tax issues. So they're quite happy to say the upcoming October budget is going to be painful, I think is the word Keir Starmer used. Expect it to be painful. And because they don't have the opposition, a viable opposition at the minute, that could challenge them in a massive way, and they're operating on the mandate of the voter.
I presume, right, I'm pretty sure that Labour, when we were going through the election and all of the lobbying and stuff, they said they weren't going to be too harsh with the budget. There really is no, I know we said this the last time, there really is no onus on them once they're in to follow anything they said they'd do. Is that correct? Is there like a...
Yeah.
Yeah, great, cool.
But I mean, in terms of things like the budget, Johnny, they didn't know what was in the Treasury. So they can say, look, we weren't in power, we didn't know, we've had to adjust accordingly. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember a government that gets into power and says, actually, the other blokes did a really good job, we don't really need to change anything. That's just not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of the things they went through in their first week, which is kind of interesting. Doubling onshore and quadrupling offshore turbines by 2030. That was one of the first things they said they were going to do. It's kind of wild. A lot of very interesting things for their first week to just go in and just do what they want. But as you said, since they have a majority, they can pretty much do what they want for the next few years. Unimportant from our global perspective, we're not here to sort the world out, just shooting and conservation. So talk to me, we discussed before some of the things they were going to change. What more do we know about that now?
There's several things we know. There's several things we don't know. So we know that none of the topics you and I talked about on a previous podcast, so I think that was firearms licensing, that was the potential to ban what they call the snare trap and the banning of the importation of certain big game hunting trophies from the world outside the UK. Now, none of those three things were in the King's speech. So a lot of people have breathed a huge sigh of relief. So that means...
And that's genuine?
The King's speech is the King's new government is outlining what they intend to do in their first year in power. So these are the things they are planning on doing. So the King's speech stuff is we're definitely going to do this. So total cost recovery, banning of snare traps, and big game hunting trophies weren't in that speech. But there's a caveat, because at the end of every King's speech, there is a add-on called any other policy. So the government base says, we are going to do these 600 things in the first year, and we might do other things as well. And the reason behind that is if something crops up, no one can say, well, it wasn't in the King's speech. So it's like when you go to a meeting, you've got any other business on the agenda, you can put anything onto the agenda that crops up during the meeting.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Is there weight in it? I presume there is, right? Because it's quite a well-publicised thing. There is weight in the things that he says. There is some onus there for that party to potentially do something about them, rather than the manifesto stuff.
Yes, so I think if it's in the King's speech, that's what the government intends to do. That's what they're planning on doing. Now, things might crop up. They might not be able to get to do all of it, parliamentary time, but those are the things, those are their priorities for this first parliament. Now, if we take something like hunting trophies, it's something I'm not a massive expert on, but let's take that particular area of policy as a for instance. It wasn't in the King's speech, so the government are probably not planning to do anything with that in the first year of their parliament. But that does not stop there being a private member's bill for it, which is exactly what it was last time. So if there's a private member's bill, there's nothing to stop the government supporting it. And as we discussed, with their massive majority, they'll be able to get it through.
What happens then with that? Because last time, wasn't it Lords that put it back in its place?
Yeah, several times. So what would basically happen in this instance, this specific one, is because it was in the Labour manifesto, something called the Salisbury Convention kicks in. And, the Salisbury Convention, broadly speaking, means the Lords will not vote down a policy that was in the previous government's in the incumbent government's manifesto.
Just got up on the UK Parliament glossary.
Yeah.
The Salisbury Doctrine, or Convention as it is sometimes called, emerged from the working arrangements reached during the Labour government of 1945 to 51, when the 5th Marquess of Salisbury was the leader of the Conservative opposition in the Lords. The Convention ensures that major government bills can get through the Lords when the government of the day has no majority in the Lords. In practice, it means that the Lords do not try to vote down at second or third reading a government bill mentioned in an election manifesto.
So in this particular instance, the Lords might decide it's not a suitable bill in the first instance and vote it down. It's unlikely that would happen in the second instance. So Parliament would go back to Parliament, they might make an amendment, it would go back to the Lords, and then effectively, because of this doctrine, this convention, that particular bill will become law, if the government so wish it to happen.
I presume from reading that, they can reject it the second time, but they pretty much have to let it through the third time.
Yeah, so there might be something glaringly, they want an amendment made, and it'll go back to Parliament, and another amendment will be made. So
they
it doesn't
might
have to
be able to limit its damage, but it will still end up going through in some form.
Yeah, that's quite right. So we've got to remember that Lords is there as a check and a measure, that the Commons don't just railroad things through and do a Putin and say, we're going to go.
They're the one with the duty
terms.
of care almost to the nation as a whole, rather than the government of the day and the people of the day.
Yeah, quite right. So the fact that something wasn't in the King's speech doesn't necessarily mean it won't become law in the first term. And like I said, there could be routes such as a private member's bill, which could make it. Now, we don't know what the government are planning. What we do know is that they're going to be looking at a lot of fiscal things. So the economy, the NHS, and prisons seem to be the top of the agenda at the minute, and I think rightly so, because in their first month of Parliament, they've let all the prisoners out. We've got rioting in the streets, and I don't know if you've noticed, but the mobile phones don't seem to work anymore either. But other than that, it's happy days, isn't it? So
you're showing your age now, like that kind of list of rants.
That was me being very refined. I haven't gone on about potholes and the M25 yet.
Look, I don't care about political parties, but if someone can sort out the M27 roadworks that have been going on, the update to a smart motorway that's been going on for, 5 years?
It has to be.
Maybe it would be nice to drive to the office not in a 50 on a motorway.
So Johnny and I live...
Any government.
Johnny and I live relatively close to each other, and that is a road we both use quite regularly. And I'm about 40 minutes from Johnny, and it currently takes nearly 2 hours to get there. It's absolutely mental.
It's crazy. And then what's a real joke is they closed the A34 for resurfacing, like 15 miles of it for a week, and it was done. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. It's just to piss Southamptoners off. Definitely being managed by the Portsmouth Civil Engineering Squad.
Now you're showing your age with your rant, but here we go, South Coast centric Johnny. So that's potentially what could happen with that bill. A similar thing could happen with firearms licensing, but I don't think there's currently a consultation going on. So they're looking at total cost recovery in terms of firearms licensing as a whole. So that's another aim of the Labour Party. Now, it'd be really interesting to hear what listeners think of total cost recovery. I think it's a really difficult thing to argue against. You're a gun owner. You've got about 10 million guns, Johnny. What do you reckon?
I mean, technically, I don't want to go into my current firearms licensing ordeal at the moment with the health checks that Hampshire people have to go through, and the fact that a good portion of my history is in Wiltshire, and Wiltshire don't want to give it to Hampshire, and ergo I'm just kind of sat in a limbo. With a Wiltshire doctor not particularly want to be communicative over what is 3 years or something, or not even, maybe even 6 months of healthcare documents, of which I never went into hospital. Unsurprising. I was never sick before I was like 27, and then I got sick all the time. But I don't hate it. I don't hate it. Like, why not? If they could provide me a service that was worth the money, I'm down. I want it to be good, I want it to be clean, I want it to be efficient, and I want it to be worth the money. I wouldn't begrudge £100 a year for a firearms licence or shotgun licence. Given that is one slab of ammunition, or about 50 rounds of centrefire ammunition, one fallow carcass, let's say, it's not a small amount of money, and, I'm far from a rich man, but £100 a year for a really slick firearms licensing system, I am all into that.
Yeah, I'm personally of that opinion as well. It's two very low-driven pheasants, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the broad scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money.
It's dinner out with your missus. In fact, it's probably less than dinner out with your missus once a year.
Say that's a starter around here.
Out of all of the things that we pay for in shooting, £100 a year for a licensing system that was clean, easy, really efficient, up to date, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's totally acceptable. I'm not looking to price people out. I don't think £100 a year would price that many people out, given that to go and shoot clays once a month, let's say you went and shot 50 clays once a month, you're into 44, 45p a clay, so you're into £22, 20 quid for ammunition, you're into 50 quid a month to go and shoot anyway, so what's £8 a month for a licence? A gun's not cheap. The fuel to get there will cost you more than the licence.
Yeah, I agree. But there's got to be some caveats with everything, right? So we're talking, you said it several times, a clean, efficient, good service. Now, what are they? We don't know, because like I said, we don't know any of this stuff. This is conjecture, we're chatting, but what are they basing the total cost recovery on? Are they basing it on a police force like Warwickshire, which is Essex, which are really efficient? Or are they basing it on Hampshire, which are not, right? So, or are they taking a mean average across the board? And I think that's what they're doing. So essentially, we might be penalised to pay more for the current inefficiencies in the service. And there are 42 individual licensing forces.
Yeah, obviously, I don't know whether one national firearms licensing source system is a great concept. But regional, I could take, as long as they had regional subdivisions.
The proposal that's been talked about as a national body, it's more of a central administrative hub, like the DVLA. So you would still have your Cumbrian firearms licensing officer, your local guy who would do the local checks and come, and he would send the paperwork to a central hub. It's about efficiency. It's
there's a big admin place in the middle of the country that handles the day-to-day stuff. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, or a force that's got capacity, the Met, for example, or wherever it happens to be. With the administrators, you don't necessarily need somebody who has the in-depth knowledge that an FEO has, because they're literally putting the paperwork together and printing a certificate and posting it. Yeah,
they're a very qualified you'd have different levels, I guess, senior down to someone who is just answering the phones and handling and putting people together, so you're not wasting somebody who should be processing licenses time, which is why so many forces only have a 2-hour phone call slot, because it's the person who should be doing the work answering the phone to you to explain to you why they haven't finished, because they're wasting an hour of their day talking to you about why they haven't finished, where they could be working on your project,
absolutely right. So, but going back, so potentially we could end up with total cost recovery. I don't think that'll happen very quickly, but I think it will happen during this 5-year Parliament, or they'll try to make it happen.
Yeah, but
and again,
as we discussed, there's no caveats because they're going to repurpose that money to go and help victims of knife crime or knife crime offenders have rehabilitation or something. So,
well, that's what they said, but I don't see.
They're not going to have extra budget. They're not going to do anything for us for that money. It's just they're going to change where the money's coming from to pay for the current systems. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's a tax on gun ownership, but equally, I don't see where you get the two together, knife crime and legal gun ownership. I don't understand the link between the two. It's like saying we're going to tax people who put new tyres on their cars, and then we're going to use that money to buy books for libraries. There's absolutely no correlation between the two.
Yeah, it's absolute madness. It's really difficult to get my head around why they've done that. Other than they've gone, hey, we can get some money out of these people, and the people will support it because they don't like guns particularly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And but this is another policy that potentially affects us, and I think there are other bits on top.
For those who don't know, by the way, Tim lives next to a train station. He is a train spotter. It's like his main hobby. It's why he moved there, so his office can stare out over one of the busiest train lines in the UK.
Is that couldn't hear it? Was there a train? Could you hear a train going past? I think there's some work to do there, but all the organisations' teams are discussing with the Home Office about various ways, and it's quite amicable. There's people. It's not the way the conversations are going is not being dictated. It's very much a conversation. Good. It's very much a how can we improve what we're doing. But we've now got new ministers, so that might stop, and they might put their own ideas on it. There was a Home Office shadow minister in the Labour Party who's now not there. He's doing something else, but he wanted shotguns to be made Section 1 the same as a firearm.
Yeah, I'm glad that kind of fell by the wayside. It just sounds dumb.
Well, it is dumb. But has it fallen by the wayside? So we've got a new government.
That was my understanding, but I guess we never know. So
we don't know. We won't know until these conversations progress, and the ministers are all very new. They get their feet under the table. Now's a good time. So now everybody's vying to influence these new ministers because some of these people have never been politicians.
Yeah, well, what a great way for them to start by being in charge of the country.
That's the nature of being a politician. So there are two ministries that basically affect us the most, us collectively as shooters, conservationists, right? Two ministries. Mm-hmm. There's the Home Office, because they deal with firearms licensing. So they affect us in a big way.
Pretty important tools for sports shooting and hunting.
Yeah, and gamekeeping. And
all conservation work. Yeah.
Conservation purposes. So there's lots of connotations there. But that basically is firearms licensing. We've then got the Secretary of State, the DEFRA body. So we've got the DEFRA Secretary, who's the Secretary of State for DEFRA, and he's a guy called Steve Reed, who I spoke about in a previous podcast. So he's the head honcho, he's the man in charge, right? So Steve's responsibilities within DEFRA are budgetary. So he decides how much money these bodies, the DEFRA family, has to spend. So that's DEFRA, Natural England, Forestry Commission, Forest Research, Forestry England, Environment Agency, etc., etc., etc. So he determines the pot of money. International relations within the rural scape, that's something he does. And appointing senior officials within the DEFRA family is under his scope. And then a really big one is economic growth, again, in farming, fisheries and food. So those are his responsibilities. Interestingly, his first meeting he took as DEFRA secretary was with the president of the National Farmers Union. So that's a good thing.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's strange because we've had so many conversations over the years about conservation issues, and when they consider gamekeepers as like a stakeholder percentage, they are often ignored. It's kind of strange to think that they'd consider gun owners as a rather significant stakeholder in firearms licensing.
Yeah.
And farmers a significant stakeholder in farming.
Yes. Well, funny that. One of the reoccurring themes with Steve Reed during the pre-election, election, and since has been talking about Britain's food security. And that's something he said, food security is a national security. is something he's actually stated. So in terms of us producing game meat and venison, I think there's a potential crossover there with food security, especially when we're talking about venison at the minute. There's an abundance.
There's a good few tons of red meat that can be added to the market every year.
Absolutely. So Steve Reed, he's the DEFRA secretary. He's the big honcho.
I'm just having a look at him on the internet. He looks like an all right guy. Like, he's got that look about him that you go, yeah, he seems like pretty normal looking.
Yeah,
trustworthy face.
Yeah, I suppose so. That's probably why he got elected. He's got a massive majority of 15,500 in his constituency, so that's pretty big. He's the MP for Croydon North in London. Well, I suppose London, but it is, to us, it's London. It's London, yeah. He's been there since 2012, and prior to that, he was worked in the Lord Mayor's office in London. Okay. So he was the shadow secretary for DEFRA, so he's got some experience as a shadow minister. But he's very urban facing, and let's be completely honest. Historically, Labour politicians and Labour governments have been the party of the urban areas. So
generally, because their policies towards the countryside are less appealing to the countryside people.
Yeah, I think you could. Yeah, I think you could easily generalise that, and as such, to pick up a DEFRA secretary in a Labour Party who's got a background in farming and forestry and getting their hands dirty is probably going to be much harder, right, than the Conservatives or the SNP, even Plaid Cymru, whoever it is. So you can,
as we said right at the beginning, I don't care who's in charge as long as they actually look after the place and leave it better than they found it. I think that the actual political side doesn't matter, especially with the things I care about, namely the countryside. And his 5 priorities, just looking at this, are things that I desperately agree with. Cleaning up rivers, because they are, they've got record levels of sewage being pumped into them, which always I feel bizarre, seeing as if you throw a tin can out the window on a motorway, you get pulled over, fined, and if you do it a few times, you get chucked in prison. Cleaning up lakes and seas as well, creating a roadmap to move Britain to a zero-waste economy, boost food security, and to ensure nature's recovery and protect communities from the dangers of flooding. Ensuring nature's recovery is something we should get onto soon enough. Sorry. That's interesting.
Yeah, so again, that's a really important theme for us, especially as game management activities are one of the biggest drivers to boosting nature recovery. And that's something we can come on to. So he's quite an important guy, and his priorities are quite important. Now, those priorities might change as he gets into the role and learns things.
Is it worth becoming a member of the Labour Party, by the way, seeing as they're in power? Like, is that necessarily a bad thing if you want to get your voice heard by these people? And they have,
no, you're a citizen. You don't need to be a member of the party. You don't need to keep the red flag flying, Johnny. Just because the Red Devils have died outside.
Surely they must. I'm not saying they listen to members above non-members, but I would have said it's probably easier to get an ear that if you're a member than if you're not.
Yeah,
is that or is that me?
So what you need to speak to your MP. You need to write to them. You need to make your views heard. That's really important. And this is something I mentioned on the podcast at all. This is something the NGO are facilitating. So we've got a couple of groups in Wales which are gaining huge traction, and they're ground up lobby groups that we facilitate. You don't need to be a member of the NGO, but so anyone can be part of these groups. It's completely free. So let's say we're going to write to you'll have a new MP in Southampton. You've probably got a Labour MP now.
So New Forest East is still Conservative. So my question for me would be: there's no point in even talking to him because he's got no power. How do I get to talk to the people who actually get to make the decisions?
Through him.
My local, through him. Okay.
Or her.
So I still have to...
So Johnny Carter needs to, and this is what we're doing in Wales broadly, and we've got one in Cambridge in East Anglia starting, and there's another one going to be starting in Kent and Essex very soon. So, and there's reasons behind the East Anglia and Cambridge lobby group is because I'm hopping about a bit here, but that's what I do. Is the next most important minister to us is the farming minister, Daniel Zeitner, and he is the MP for Cambridge.
Okay.
So an East Anglian Cambridge lobby group is quite important, so constituents can actually write to the farming minister, Daniel Zeitner. Now, so little Johnny Carter wants to find something out. So something's happening in your world, and it could be trophy hunting, it could be snaring, right? So you want to find out what the government are planning on doing. You write to your MP and you say, "My name's Little Johnny. I live at," so you can prove you're a constituent. The government are planning on doing this, banning the use of snare traps, right? I'm a conservationist. I use this tool to protect lapwings, and I can't use any other method because it's a bog, whatever, right?
Yeah, we're on the New Forest. It's hard to shoot things around here.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So this is the reason I want to use this particular piece of equipment, and the government are planning on banning it. I would like your support in stopping them from doing it. They'll write back to you.
If not, you need to tell me why not.
And if not, you need to. They have an obligation to write back to you, or to come and see you at surgery. So they write back to you and say, "I'm not going to support you because." That then opens the door for you to say, "Well, these are the reasons why this thing's really good." And
can you please justify why you need to ban it? Yeah.
Yes, and they can then say, "Well, I will ask a question in the House." They will then ask the government why they're planning on doing this, and because they want to point score. When the government says we're doing it because of this, they'll say, well, actually, no, that's not correct. These are the facts. So you'll get those facts read out in the House, potentially.
And is their obligation to do so?
No, but if you put enough pressure on them. So what we found out in Wales, we wrote a letter to an AM, Assembly member, not MP, Assembly member, saying, we don't think you should ban the releasing of game birds because I like to go beating, whatever it is.
Okay, so which is fair enough, yeah. As community, something we discussed 1,000 times.
Yeah, exactly. That AM...
It's important for people to understand that.
Absolutely. That AM then wrote back and said, well, Natural Resources Wales have done a consultation and they've analysed the results and they've already presented their evidence to the Welsh Government, which is they advise we do this. So that person then wrote back under the guidance of the NGO and said, well, yeah, but 44,000 people responded to the consultation and you only looked at 1.5% of the responses. As a Welsh citizen, I don't believe you have taken the views and accounts of all those people into account, and I don't believe it's democratic.
44,000 people submitted, and they listened to 1.5%. That's
not
democratic.
It's not.
That's the opposite of democratic.
Absolutely. So that was sort of ignored, that letter. Then about 4 or 5 days afterwards, we got another constituent to write a not dissimilar letter saying, I don't think you should ban I don't think you should license the release of game birds, and these are the reasons why. And then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. By the time the fourth person had written to the AM, they, instead of a standard response back that said, NRW have looked at the consultation, yada, 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 they got a personal response back saying, I've actually had a few letters about this now, and I'm going to look into it further.
Now, did they get any follow-up on that, or is that just current state of play?
This is still ongoing. So they've now... Since then, they've now gone to Natural Resources Wales and asked to see how they did the calculation of which 1.5% they looked at. So that's progress being made. Now, that's 5 constituents writing on the same topic. Now, those letters were facilitated by the NGO, and we're going to replicate that across the England and Wales. Right.
And at this point, letters have to be individual, correct?
Yeah, so... Well, they don't have to be, but basically, if you write a round robin, you sign a round robin. They don't. When you get your automated response back from your MP or AM, it generally says, "I do not respond to automated letters."
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So when when the NGO do this for people, and I say you don't have to be a member. We'll just say, look, so for example, I'm going to use the Welsh one because it's the one that I'm dealing with at the minute. Are you a Welsh speaker? What relationship do you have to game management activities? And it might be, I'm not a Welsh speaker, but I'm Welsh born and bred in Caerphilly, and I'm part-time gamekeeping. Or, yes, full-time Welsh speaker, I go beating 3 times a year, but I find it really helps me with mental health and exercise. So we'll put that in the letter. I've got 3 dogs and I like to walk them whilst out beating because I can get onto the hill where I'm not allowed normally. All that sort of stuff. So each letter is individual because you're writing the same one. So effectively they've got 5 different constituencies coming to them with the same problem from 5 different angles. And it works, Johnny. It does work. So having the nous and the will to stand up and say something to your MP actually does and can make a difference.
Should we be doing this prophylactically is probably my next big question. Is it worth saying, these things were in the Labour manifesto, I need you to be aware that if they come in, these are the arguments I need to put against them for my livelihood, my well-being, being it mental, physical, or just the well-being of this as a state?
Yes.
Okay, that is interesting. So that's actually worth doing.
And that actually I had to think about, which was what the pause was. That wasn't a bad internet connection. That was my tiny brain cell trying to catch up. Yes, because
you're educating your MP ready for a future fight rather than them thinking, oh God, they're just doing this because I want to ban what they love.
Yeah. The reason I paused, and I'll caveat what I've said, and we're going down a bit of a blind rabbit hole here, which tends to happen. But so the reason I paused, if you were asking the NGO to prophylactically bring things up to the minister that may not be on their radar, I'm not entirely sure that's the best approach. Sometimes no news is good news, right? If you are a constituent in a marginal seat or a newly awarded seat to a new MP, I think it's actually a very good thing to say, this is how it affects me personally. Because all we can talk about is this how it affects the sector.
Yeah, and it does make sense that they understand that not everybody voted for them, and that their job is to look after everybody in their constituency, not just those that voted for them.
Yeah.
Right? That's how democracy works. I haven't got that wrong.
You haven't got that wrong, but it's such a big majority. This is where we have problems with our system. But so I think if you've got an issue, I was about to do an A-team advert, if you've got an issue and no one else can help. But it's... You know, an MP can help with an education issue, anything really. So where I live, there's lots of armed forces here, and relocation's a problem when they come out. The local MPs are really good at helping servicemen and women reintegrate out of the army and all that sort of stuff. Now, you're no different. Just because you're involved with hunting, shooting, fishing, you're no different. If something's going to fundamentally change your life, there are people who can help.
If the government's decision is going to fundamentally change your life, yeah, the onus should be on them to sort that out.
Absolutely. But it's not just the government's decision. I mean, they can help with other things. So, you know, you live next to a industrial estate, they're going to turn it into a chemical factory. Potentially you're going to have fumes and all that sort of stuff. You could write to your MP on that. So that's not a government decision, that's a local thing happening. So you can use your MP for anything. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, and put me in touch with Erin Brockovich now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're showing your age. That was when Tom Cruise was about 58. So writing to your MP is really, really important. And if you happen to have one of these ministers as your MP, you can write to them because as a constituent, your MP, you've elected them. So they're there to represent you. And now if you happen to have one of these ministers, you can write to them as a constituent on the subjects they're being ministerial. So if you're in Cambridge, you can write to our friend Daniel Zeichner, the farming minister. And Daniel's portfolio covers food security, fisheries, rural, farmed animal welfare, including bovine TB, if that interests you.
How do these people get chosen? Is it just like they reckon that they're a good, trustworthy person to do the job, or?
Yeah, so some and some. Some will be because they're rising stars within the party, and they're earmarked for things like the Treasury or, you know, Deputy Prime Minister, that sort of thing. So they're given quite important ministerial roles to see how they perform.
Okay, so they prove themselves for being put in these seats.
But that's the idea. Yeah,
and they're leaders rather than doers. So people come to them with the information, and they will help then guide their staff to make the right decision when it comes to parliamentary choices.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. And then you got people like Daniel Zeichner who, if you can look back at all the questions they've asked in Parliament and all the speeches they've made.
Yeah, I'm currently looking. This is very interesting. There's
so
1,743 questions he's been asked with a registered response. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and a lot of his questions are about marine biology and marine protection zones.
The first page is about whitefish.
A lot of it's about whitefish, right? So I've gone through that as well. So part of his portfolio is lead for Centre of Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, lead for Sea Fish Industry Authority, because that's something he's clearly interested in. So they've given him the portfolio towards that. So the Lords Minister, Baroness Hayman, she was an MP. She had a constituency in Cumbria where she has a small holding. Now, she's in the Lords, so she's a peer, she's a life peer, so she's not elected. And that's quite normal to have ministers who are from the Lords as well. It is quite normal. The Conservatives did it with Richard Benyon. So they've appointed somebody who has an understanding of the sector, but isn't necessarily elected, but they can still be a minister, if that makes any sense. Okay. So Baroness Hayman was involved with the NFU. She's got a small holding, but most of what she's interested in is animal welfare. So she has been the Secretary of State for Environment and Rural Affairs, so DEFRA. She's been the Shadow Secretary for Flooding and Coastal Minister and Communities Minister as well. And the same with the Lords. So her portfolio is much more about biosecurity, animal welfare, importantly, access, including coastal paths. So access is quite an important bit for us. Okay. Public access. And then she leads for the APHA, the Animal Plant Health Authority, which 2 years ago was incredibly important for us because that's the authority that cover bird flu. They're part of the DEFRA family. So I said Environment Agency, Natural England, etc., etc. APHA are part of that family. So if there's a bird flu outbreak, Baroness Hayman will be the one that makes the decisions. So under obviously veterinarian advice. But go back 2 years. We had a different Lords Minister in charge, and there was a bird flu epidemic, well documented, and some of the large NGOs, so large non-governmental organisations, conservation charities and bird charities, lobbied really hard that shooting was suspended during the outbreak.
Yeah, which didn't make much sense.
Well, of course it didn't. It was a there was a bullet in the barrel, and they pulled the trigger and saw where it landed. That was the idea. Let's see if we can get some success. Nothing to lose, right? If you do that, only something to win. So
from their perspective, damage can be done, and they don't really care about the science behind it.
Yeah,
even though I think we discussed at the time, it makes potentially more sense to get on and get those birds dead if we really want to talk about
reduce the
genuinely
biomass.
Good thing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
reduce biomass. Get out and incentivise shoots to get on and shoot them early.
Yeah. So that's the view the Lords Minister at the time took. And there was another reason, the massive economic reason to halt shooting at that point of the season. So this was July, August time, when the bulk of the birds are out, released, the deposit has been paid. You're talking about a £3 billion sector, right? So he took the decision not to. Now, would we end up with the same decision from this different minister? I don't know. I've never met her, I've never spoken to her. So we need to start these dialogues. Right now, she's a Lords Minister, so the bottom-up approach doesn't work because she doesn't have any constituencies.
Yeah, she owes nothing to anyone, technically. But that's also, hopefully, I'm a bit ignorant on the House of Lords. Can people get, ejected from the House of Lords if they are seen to not actually be making votes in the public interest or for the betterment of the country? Not making decisions not befitting, a member of the upper house? Surely.
A life peer. You can have the whip removed, but I'm not sure I know the answer to that. A hereditary peer, no, but they've pretty much all gone. But a life peer, I think you're going to have to Google that one, Johnny, for me. I don't know.
No, I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, good.
I've always wondered that, right? Because I understand that the whole point of them is to kind of protect us from bad decision making by acting like adults.
Yeah.
But what if someone doesn't?
Well, I think over history there's been lots of people that don't.
All right, let's have a look. Can someone be removed from the House of Lords? Under a new law, all peers can retire or resign from the chamber. Yeah, prior to this, only hereditary peers could disclaim their peerages. Peers can be disqualified for non-attendance. Peers can be removed for receiving prison sentences for a year. Peers can be kicked out. That's interesting.
There you go. So
and there's going to be plenty of anti-corruption laws and that kind of thing in place anyway. It was just more of I do wonder, how they keep that as a check and measure from being a bad one. I always presumed that, obviously, that you have to be upstanding to be that as if you would if you're a magistrate and all this kind of thing. You're kind of held accountable on a daily basis that you don't do dumb stuff with your life. You're a good decision maker.
MPs just have the whip removed and they become independents, don't they? And then so it's a very difficult thing to do, but because it's such an old parliament, they need to change those rules.
Yeah, we're not going to get onto reform and revolution conversation because I'm down for that. Okay,
I can just see you leading with your placard at the front of the queue.
I'll have a lollipop stick with a freedom and lower taxes now kind of comment. Yeah.
Yeah, next to your mates from Extinction Rebellion and your other bezies from Just Stop Oil.
Look, I would be 100% liberal and with those guys. Delete student debt, but also delete my mortgage. And then we'll all be equal.
Right on, brother. Anyway, Putin,
let's carry on.
Yeah. Keep the red flag flying. So Russia's nice this time of year, Johnny. Did you know that? It's,
yeah, and I wouldn't need much of a mortgage. There's plenty of empty houses.
Old Mr. Stalin there on the other side of the screen. Where were we? We were looking at ministers. So those are three of the ministers. There's also a very specific minister called Emma Hardy, and she is the Minister for Water and Flooding.
So she's the sewage one. She is the one who's going to sort out the water companies and the sewage and the accountability.
Yes, but she also has the role, which is why I brought this up, for environmental regulation, including chemicals, contaminated land, and REACH. That's basically the body that we're looking at lead shot.
Okay.
Emma Hardy will be the minister, and these are quite junior roles, these last two are quite junior roles, but she's obviously overseen by Steve Reed, but she'll be the minister that REACH would speak to. So if you wanted to do something, talk to someone about lead shot, or about the length of time we need to transition away, or the amount of infrastructure needed to put in for a cartridge company to produce non-lead, whatever, that would be the minister to go to.
Okay, and she'll have to take that information to Parliament, then fight a corner to make a decent and intelligent decision for any legal.
Now that's a really good question. What they often do is say, "Thank you very much for the information. Can you please pass that on to my department?" Or "I have passed it to my department."
Interesting. Apparently on emmahardy.org.uk.
Yeah, but again, I don't know her. She's
representative for Kingston and all.
Yes. Since 2017, so she's in her second go. She was a primary school teacher beforehand. If you were a teacher, you would have been a member of the Socialist Education Association, Johnny, and she was the Deputy General Secretary of the Socialist Educational Association.
She gets like a semi-trustworthy vote.
She was part of the Shadow DEFRA team, so she knows DEFRA. So none of these people have been thrown in here blindly. Okay, they've all had some sort of grounding in the department they're in at the minute.
Yeah, and the Shadow DEFRA team, they're still a full-time worker at DEFRA, basically making their counter-arguments or fighting for their party's interest inside of DEFRA, correct?
No, because they're an elected MP, so they would be a backbench MP, so there'll be a shadow. I'm not actually even sure who the shadow ones are at the minute. So there will be a shadow Secretary of State for DEFRA, and these various shadow ministers will go down. Now, they are there for a sort of check and a measure that the government aren't running away with it. But the civil servants are they report to the minister, not to the shadow minister.
They're literally just there to scrutinise policy.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, yeah, so they're not actually doing anything other than read through papers and go, I don't agree, I'll take it to my people to fight in Parliament.
I don't agree, we're going to ask a question in Parliament, and that's where they stand on the box and say, why has your party decided to do this? And then they say, I've decided to do that, and they'll wave their...
Because we've got a majority, ha ha ha!
And basically, and that's all Labour need to do now. They don't actually need to justify anything, because it's such a big majority. So we're going to move on to the last one. The last MP, I think, is, in terms of everything holistically we need to talk about, other than Steve Reed, the actual Secretary of State, is the Minister for Nature, Mary Creer, CBE. Her responsibilities are pretty big. Tree planting and forestry, international nature and wildlife, national landscapes, including national parks, so anything that's seen as a national landscape. She's the lead for Natural England. She's the lead for the Forestry Commission, and she's the lead for the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, as well as lots of other things, a green finance, circular economy, domestic biodiversity.
Yeah, the lead for Kew.
She's the lead for Kew Gardens. There's always a Kew minister, always. So her portfolio, in terms of everything we do, is really important.
A huge deal, right?
Yeah, really important. Whether you're a deerstalker, a game shop, a gamekeeper,
Natural England Forestry Commission, the JNCC, like these are big deals.
Yeah. So So we need to be friends with Mary, basically, and her department. She's the MP for Coventry East, so if any of the listeners are constituents of Coventry East, please get in touch.
There's no point getting in touch if you are not, or certainly not as a role as an MP, but can you get in touch with her in a context for Minister of Nature?
Yes.
Or is that not the correct route?
No, you can, absolutely. You can make your views known to her through letters. She doesn't have the same obligations to answer as she does if she's actually your MP. So if she's your MP, she must answer.
Okay, so we do need some constituents of hers to be asking questions of how she feels about certain things, just so we can get like a general idea of her persuasions. Is that important?
Yeah, because I don't know what her leaning to is at the minute. But let's look at things. Natural England at the minute, we've got the general licence that certainly your TGS viewers will. A lot of those will be operating under the general licence. They'll be shooting pigeons and crows, and So you've got hundreds of thousands of people who watch the videos. Loads and loads of those will be. So Natural England issue those licences. So each and every one of those viewers is directly affected by a decision this minister might take with regard to those licences. So basically, Mary Creer is quite important. Licensing, Forestry Commission. She was involved in, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, the Conservative government to raise funds. So basically everything comes around full circle. Labour had been in for years and years and years. Conservative came in and said, oh my God, there's no money in the pot. What are we going to do? I know what we're going to do. We're going to sell off the Forestry Commission's assets to raise a couple of £1 billion, was the idea. Instead of Labour have come in.
They sold a lot off.
Well, they did, but they were going to sell 80% of it off, and it was Mary Creer who stopped it. She was the minister who secured a House of Commons debate on the government's plan to sell off 85% of the Forestry Commission's land. So, and once it became public and there was a debate in Parliament, the government withdrew from the plans to do it. So that land was never sold. Yeah.
Oh, we don't have public land in the UK, but that's as close as we've got. Literally as close as we've got.
Well, it really is. But there were going to be things like, I don't think you could have sold the New Forest, for example. These would have been commercial conifer blocks. But it doesn't matter. So she, again, what I was saying is these ministers aren't just dropped in here with absolutely no knowledge or understanding. She's got a knowledge and she's got an interest in the department she's in. Yeah. So she, like I said, we come around full circle. So we got a new government. They've opened the box. Oh my God, there's no money. Instead of saying we're going to sell off the Forestry Commission, they're just going to tax a load of us instead. So
suddenly I'm pro selling the forest.
Well, yeah. Save my pocket, sell a tree. That should be the slogan.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because I don't see many other forestry companies not having money.
No, I mean the Forestry Commission have got a massive budgetary shortfall again this year, and I think I read
how where does that money go? Surely that should be a profit-making exercise. Surely the whole point is that it's a profit-making exercise.
I think they'd have to run it very differently because it's run with the public
department.
Yeah, it's run like a government department. I mean, come on. So what do you expect? Yeah. Firearms licensing, say no more. I
tell you what, there's a whole podcast we could do on maybe we could get someone on and talk about maybe someone who runs a forestry company and go,
yeah,
how does it work? How is it different from the Forest Commission? How should the Forest Commission actually make money? There is no reason the Forest Commission shouldn't make money, because if you gave you all that woodland and said make a profit, you go, all right, that's not that much of a challenge, surely.
Yeah.
Because if you fired everyone, there's no outgoings and the trees still grow. So, you're onto a pretty good start. It's not like you've got taken all the cathedrals of Britain that would cost you £1 billion just to keep them standing.
Yeah.
Move on. Sorry.
I think there is an argument for contracts. Scotland have gone sort of down that route. They've got a lot more private contractors who pay a fee and then turn a profit, and it seems to sort of work. But I think that's a completely different podcast.
Yeah, but it is an interesting question as to how the Forest Commission doesn't make money.
Yeah, but don't forget, we've gone from a right-wing government that want to privatise everything for exactly that reason, to let the private sector take the burden, to a Labour government who want to re-privatise the railways. I don't think that's going to be on the cards, certainly for the next 5 years. And I don't think they'd even talk about it. I don't think they'd even talk about privatising a national resource of any kind.
And no, I mean, not even privatising and leasing, I guess. But in reality, they're just going to tax us more for 5 years, and then that will never go down. So that's good news.
On that happy note.
Yes, on that happy note. So generally speaking, we don't know much more. All we know is now who's in charge. We can have a look at them. They all seem actually quite qualified, which is really good. They've all had some experience, even if it is just as the antagonist side of their job. Yeah. And this fills me with a bit of joy. And more importantly, most of them look quite trustworthy.
Which gets Johnny's seal of approval. So,
well, it's better than not. Come on, it's much nicer to have someone you go, yeah, I reckon I could have a conversation with them. Yeah. Like, first impressions count for everything. We all know that. It's basic human nature. That if you're going to have a word with them, it's best that they don't have like a hit me face.
Yeah, it's true. But I'm going to put this. Johnny's been looking at like their profile, so they're putting like a really good picture. They're not going to put a picture of them with like a pair of Slim Shady sunglasses on
they
sideways.
All look like Gollum. I can imagine it now.
Exactly. So I think the sort of super social media world you live in, Johnny, which is Mr. Instagram.
Well, no, but it is. I don't know. I do think it's important. It's a bit like Keir Starmer has got an electable face. You look at him and you go, yeah, you'd vote for him. Predecessors, a few of them probably less votable.
Is that why Alex Salmond never got in?
I'm just having a look at him right now. I think he looks better now than he looked before.
Less stress.
Yeah, that's probably a great deal. We should all we should be electing retirees into Parliament because they all look the most chilled.
I think we pretty much have. But, so anyway, we got some great insights today. Most of them are on the way Johnny perceives the world. I think that's probably the most fascinating thing that's come out of today's podcast for me.
No. I think it is totally defendable. Certainly when it comes to politicians, you can't trust much. You can't trust what they're going to do. You can't trust that what they've done has any pertinence to what they're going to do. But you can at least look at them and go, you look trustworthy. That's literally all you've got. I think that's fair. Because you can't trust anything else. There's no consistency.
Initially. But I would then say...
We'll get some track. But we've also seen like full U-turns in the past as well. So
yeah, and actually, so I've never had a problem with the government making a U-turn. So I don't see why, especially if the U-turn is the right thing to do. So why do they get so much flack? It really annoys me. So we've decided to do something. Actually, we've looked into it. It's not a good idea. So we're going to stop.
Definitely would have been preferable with Brexit. I spend a lot of time in customs queues nowadays.
That's because you're an international jet setter. So my holiday was in Northumberland.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week, shall we?
Oh, I can do, yeah.
Yeah, on that bombshell. Guys, get in touch with your local MP. Get in touch with your not local MP if they're in charge of something that you think is actually important to you. You can send them an email, right? It doesn't need to be a handwritten letter. You could spend half an hour and just fire something off to them and go, I would like to make contact with you because this is important to me. What are you actually going to do with this? What are your intentions? And please bear in mind, this is the point of view of the science. That is worthwhile time. Yes?
Yes, please do it. If you need help with it, contact the NGO, whether you're a member or not. Come through directly to me on my email address, which Johnny will put somewhere, magic in some link, and we can help. We can help you achieve what you need to do.
Perfect. Well, that was less depressing than I thought. This is actually kind of fun, sort of following this process to a certain extent. I think whilst the Conservatives was in charge, I took my eye off the ball a little bit politically, because inherently they're a bit more on our side, right? And only when it came to things like the trophy import ban and a few other things, I kept my eyes on it when it was pertinent. But with the new government, it's kind of all to play for, and the developments are happening much faster and in a different direction to what we've seen maintained in the past. So, cool. Thank you, Tim.
Take care, everyone. Have a good week, John.
I'll speak to you soon.